A few months ago, Red Bull dropped their second driver, Sergio Perez, due to his performances, leaving 2 drivers to potentially take his spot. Yuki Tsunoda, the consistent driver in the team with the catchiest theme tune in F1.
Yuki Tsunoda, Yuki Tsunoda.
Or the new feisty teammate of Liam Lawson, who was showing quite a bit of pace. Oh, and also the second catchiest theme tune in F1.
Every driver, get out of my way! I'm Liam Lawson! I'm Liam Lawson! Tsunoda! You! Helper Bucker! You! Danny Rick! You! Monza! You!
And as we all know, the latter got the spot. And this really puts Tsunoda in a tough position in his career, as with Red Bull and Honda's partnership leaving, which was the main tie for Yuki Tsunoda, and with his contract ending, potentially he is out of a seat. It really is a make or break season for him. And I am going to be talking about the 3 pathways that he could take in F1. We'll start off with the keeping it in the family pathway, and no, not the Alabama way, the Red Bull family way. And I think I can say before even explaining it that this is a really complicated situation, as so many things have to happen for Tsunoda to now get the Red Bull seat, and it all relies on basically preying on everyone's downfall around him. So the first way he gets that Red Bull seat is, we know how loose they are with that second driver's seat. Gasly, Albon, they eventually got Perez in there quite comfortably, but we don't know what they're going to do with Lawson. If Lawson, come summer, really hasn't performed in that Red Bull, then potentially they would look over to Tsunoda. But for me, I just don't think the performances are going to be that bad where they're going to be looking to replace Lawson in 2025, potentially if he doesn't do well enough in 2026. But I think that's too much time for Red Bull to think about a situation for Tsunoda to actually get that spot. As you have the likes of Hadjar, who potentially have that seat over him. Now, that all again relies on Hadjar actually being good. But let's say Hadjar isn't actually just terrible, he's just okay. I really think with Hadjar's stronger connection to Red Bull, they would take trying to push him into that seat instead. My God, they might even look outside the Red Bull family at that point, because they've done it before with Perez, and that seems to be the only way it's worked thus far. But there's a reason I'm making this video. It is because I don't think this is a realistic situation. Do I think Tsunoda will beat Hadjar? Yes. But will he absolutely thrash him? I don't think so, because Tsunoda's not a Verstappen-esque driver. Will Lawson be bad enough for Red Bull to drop him by summer? No, I don't think so. So there's too many holes in this pathway. Basically, Tsunoda just needs to be absolutely flawless, which he's not. And I'd quite like to add as well, especially with where Red Bull are as a constructor, Liam Lawson doesn't really even have the pressure of keeping them in first place as a constructor, because they know Ferrari and McLaren are going to be fast in this season. So honestly, if Red Bull still just got third, it wouldn't be out of the blue and a crazy result where they're like they have to make changes. So for me, it gets a 2 out of 5 on the realism scale, where 0 is Latifi taking that second driver spot, to 5, which is news we already know, so Hamilton to Ferrari. It's happened. But now, this is the interesting pathway that Tsunoda could take. And it's the one where he leaves the Red Bull family. Now, how would this happen? Well, like I mentioned, his contract is coming to an end in 2025. 2026, new regulations. Teams will be looking for driver replacements, no doubt. There will be some rookies, potentially, that don't cut it. There will be some drivers who retire. Things will happen in F1 from this year to next year that potentially could give him a leeway into another team. But performance-wise, again, Tsunoda simply needs to put his foot to the floor, metaphorically and physically, to make sure that he can branch out. Because if he wants to move to another team, I think at the stage of his career right now, it has to be as either an equal driver or number 1. And I don't think there's many number 1 spots. And the reason I say number 1 spot and not a number 2 driver is because he's been in the sport actually quite a while now, and I think we sort of can see where he's going to develop as an F1 driver. If he's not making any big grounds this season, he's never going to be the likes of Charles Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton. He's never going to be a driver like that, which means he'll never get to a top team. Or even the bottom teams, they normally like to have a number 1 driver, experienced driver who's decent, and then a rookie or someone a bit less developed, which Tsunoda right now doesn't really fall into either of those categories. So he's sort of an outlier on the grid, because yes, he could move to another team, but what team would take him right now? Sauber With Hulkenberg leading the team, he's not going anywhere going into 2026 with Audi. And unless Bortoleto does dreadful and crashes the car every single race, I think they'll want to try to develop him again. He's a rookie. They're more interested. This is more like a testing season compared to anything else. They'll see what he's like in 2026. So Sauber, technically Audi is off the limits for Tsunoda. Williams, quite self-explanatory. They've got Sainz and Albon. Unless one of them leaves, couldn't see him going anywhere near those spots. Those spots are very much secured for those two drivers. And then also Alpine, you've got Gasly, who's the clear number one driver. I can't see him moving up anywhere because the front running teams, there's no room anywhere. So the likes of Tsunoda and Gasly can't really fit in. But Alpine-wise, you've got Gasly coming in, and they're also doing the Sauber sort of situation of seeing what they can develop, potentially with Duham in that second driver's seat if he performs well. And if not, they've already put their eggs all into the Colapinto basket. So it'd be him who'd get that spot. It wouldn't be Yuki Tsunoda. So I've already technically gone through 7 of the teams because he wouldn't get a spot at Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Williams, Alpine or Sauber. So that leaves potentially for me only 2 outcomes if he left the Red Bull family. Now I'll talk about the less likely outcome, which would be he'd move to Haas. And this one, again, it relies on Esteban Ocon, of all drivers, to not do well. Now, we know Esteban Ocon's not the best teammate. He's never really been able to keep at a single team for a very long time, and he always rubs people the wrong way. And that's why I could sort of see him pushing himself into Haas. But that's the only reason. He doesn't have any ties to Ferrari, which Haas like putting a Ferrari driver in. Ollie Behrman's seat's pretty safe, unless, again, he's rubbish. They like to have a developing driver. And Esteban Ocon, he's not as experienced as some of the other drivers on the grid. He's not as good as our number one driver, technically, than Pierre Gasly and Nico Hulkenberg. Again, Ocon really has to be dreadful for them to want to get rid of him a year later. And Ocon, by all means, isn't a terrible driver. So where does Yuki Tsunoda fit into that? Not anywhere. Now, the main team I could see him moving to, and this is how dire his situation is, I think, when I tell you this, is actually Aston Martin. And it's bad how that's the most realistic thing I can think of if he branched out of the Red Bull family. Because of Honda ties, 2026, Honda will be partnering up with Aston Martin. That's where Yuki Tsunoda comes in. They'll want to have Yuki Tsunoda there if he's not being used properly at Red Bull. The issue is, you're not replacing Fernando Alonso. And he's gonna want to stay until at least 2026. The reason he's there now, still going, is Adrian Newey. It'd be crazy if Alonso just turned around at the end of the 2025 season and was like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to call it a day. The season Adrian Newey is about to give him potentially a brilliant car. And then again, Lance Stroll, he gets a lot of shit online. He gets it basically everywhere. He's not the best. But when you're the son of the owner, you can do whatever you want. Again, people have said, potentially he'll want to try something else with his life. Or maybe eventually he'll just get bored of F1. But if anyone got told that if you waited one more year, Adrian Newey's bringing you a car, you're going to stick in F1. So I can't see either of those two leaving. So where does that leave Yuki Tsunoda in this situation? I kid you not, I think if Yuki Tsunoda was to leave Red Bull, he would end up as the Aston Martin reserve driver. And he would be there in 2026, potentially 2027, basically until Fernando Alonso retires. And then he would take the spot. I think if he leaves the Red Bull family, he's going to be out of the sport for a year or two. We've seen Esteban Ocon do it before. You can get back into the groove of things. But what a shame that would be for Tsunoda's career. For the realism scale, I've got to give it a 4 out of 5. I think because it's quite broad as well, 8 teams technically compared to staying at a family of 2 teams, there's more chance of that happening. And with where his career is now, I don't think he's going to be happy even just sticking at Racing Bulls if he's not getting that Red Bull seat. So it is the most realistic option, but it's not a good option, like I said. So we'll see exactly how that goes, but not looking too good for him. The final option, which is the stay at home, don't do anything, you're sticking at Racing Bulls for another season or potentially 2. And there is really no right answer for his career at the minute. He's just got to sort of go with the craziness of what happens. Just keep an eye out on drivers that are losing their seats or potentially losing their seats and push your way in there. Racing Bulls also has this issue where for him, Lawson needs to be terrible. Don't think that's happening, but that's one of the things that again would help him stick in the Red Bull family. Again, Hadjar needs to be terrible. We've spoken about these two quite a bit. No offers anywhere else and no other academy drivers coming through the ranks. Now, like I said, I've mentioned the first 3 points quite a bit in this video, so I won't really touch base on them. But It's the fourth one that worries me. Tsunoda, like I've mentioned, he's an outlier now on the grid. He doesn't really have a proper home to be secure in. And well, if any Red Bull Academy driver in F2 does well this season, it's putting his seat at risk first. Again, unless Hadjar is absolutely terrible. But who's to say there's not two F2 Academy Red Bull drivers that could take those seats? They could do a full redo of their drivers. It's Red Bull's sister team. They sort of use it as that experimenting team. And that's not a far off shout, as in F2 next season, Red Bull have 3 Academy drivers. They have the 19-year-old Pepe Marti, the 20-year-old Oliver Gotha, and 17-year-old Arvid Lindblad. All 3 of these have a chance to perform well in F2. And if they did, even just one of them puts a lot of pressure on Tsunoda. 2, and I think it's wraps for him, especially if he doesn't have any other teams giving him options. It's a sad reality that Yuki Tsunoda's gotten himself into, and I constantly am deeping it more that this wasn't all just about getting that Red Bull seat this year. Now that he hasn't got that, he's got no career path. All of these scenarios, bar the Red Bull one, is terrible. And that's the most unrealistic one of the bunch. I really am worried for Yuki Tsunoda's career, and I am worried that this could be the last time we see him for a while in 2025. This scenario of him staying at Racing Bulls, for me, gets a 3 out of 5. I think it's more likely than him going to Red Bull, but I think him pursuing somewhere else, potentially, like I said, Aston Martin reserve driver, is much more likely. But this is all I have to say before the season starts about Yuki Tsunoda. Comment down below, what do you think about his situation? Do you think he has enough to have gotten that Red Bull seat in the first place? Does he have enough to stay in the Red Bull family? Does he have enough ties to be doing any of this? What do you think about the other teams? Where would he go if he was leaving the Red Bull family? I want to hear all your thoughts. But as always, love you all, and I'll see you all on Friday. Take care.